The FBI made the designation official at 11:47 this morning. Domestic terrorism. Not a hate crime, not a mental health incident. Terrorism. The specific federal classification that triggers a separate investigative framework, a separate prosecutorial standard, and a separate set of questions about how it was allowed to happen. 14 people are confirmed dead at a shopping center in Garland, Texas. 22 more are hospitalized, 6 in critical condition. The shooter, identified and named in federal charging documents filed this afternoon, left a manifesto that investigators say contains explicit references to the Iran conflict, to the anti-war movement, and to what the document describes as America's war machine. And the president's response, his first public statement after the FBI terrorism designation, was not a call for unity. It was a tweet, 11 words, posted 43 minutes after the designation. That tweet is already the center of a political firestorm that is moving faster than the investigation. Trump didn't just fail to meet the moment with the gravity it required. Trump didn't just post 11 words when a nation in shock needed something larger, more anchored, more presidential than a social media post that used the word disgrace but did not use the word condolences. Trump responded to the deadliest domestic terrorism event in 3 years with a message that was read immediately and publicly by the families of the 14 dead as being about politics rather than about their loss. He planned for his response to land as strength. He got a bipartisan condemnation that included 5 Republican senators within 90 minutes and a Gold Star mother from San Antonio whose son died in Al Anbar 6 weeks ago, now on camera, saying, in 8 words that will be played on every network for the next 72 hours, that she could not tell the difference anymore between who was being protected and who was being forgotten. And in the gap between 11 words and what the moment demanded, something shifted. Not in the polls, not yet. In the room. The room where the country takes the measure of its leadership in the worst moments. And the measurement came back wrong. In the next few minutes, I am going to show you exactly what the FBI's terrorism designation means, legally, investigatively, and politically. I am going to walk you through the documented content of the manifesto, not the inflammatory sections, the structural ones, the ones that connect this act of violence to the current political environment in ways that investigators say they have never seen quite this directly before. I am going to show you what the 11-word tweet produced in the 43 minutes between the designation and the response, and in the 90 minutes after. And I am going to tell you why today's events have measurably changed the political and security landscape of the United States in ways that will still be visible years from now, regardless of which direction the investigation goes from here. Imagine you are a parent. Your child is in a shopping center on a Tuesday afternoon. You get a phone call, and then you turn on the television, and the President of the United States, the person whose job, above all other jobs in the Republic, is to speak for the nation in its worst moments, responds to what happened to your family with 11 words and the word disgrace, with no mention of the people who are dead, no mention of the families who are waiting in hospital corridors, no mention of the community that is in shock. And then you watch 5 senators from the president's own party issue statements within 90 minutes that use the words his statement did not use. You do not need a poll to know what happened. You felt it. Hold that thought. Because the families in Garland, Texas felt exactly that today. And the country is watching how the people responsible for protecting those families respond to the feeling. Drop your answer in the comments right now. Does a president's response to a domestic terrorism event, the specific words chosen, the timing, the medium, matter as much as the policy response that follows? Or is the substance of the investigation and the security response what actually changes things? Let us rewind the clock. This did not start this morning. It started with a threat environment that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have been flagging in increasingly urgent terms for months, and that the administration has been responding to in public with the confidence framing that has characterized its communication on every security matter since the Iran strikes began. The DHS threat assessment published in February, a public document available on the DHS website, not classified, not leaked, described a heightened and evolving domestic terrorism threat landscape specifically connected to prolonged military engagements abroad and to the polarized domestic political environment surrounding those engagements. The assessment flagged three specific threat vectors: lone actor violence inspired by anti-war grievance, retaliatory violence inspired by pro-conflict grievance, and organized network violence from both foreign-inspired and domestically radicalized actors. The assessment rated the threat level as elevated, the second highest designation in the DHS framework. That assessment was published 7 weeks before the Garland shooting. The shopping center that was targeted was in a congressional district represented by a Republican who voted against the War Powers Resolution. The manifesto explicitly references that vote. The FBI is investigating whether the targeting was political. The DHS said the threat was elevated, 7 weeks before it materialized, in the public record, available to anyone. The administration's entire domestic security posture in the post-Iran strike environment was built on one catastrophic assumption: that the political polarization surrounding the Iran operation would express itself through the normal channels of democratic contention, protests, votes, polls, primaries, and would not cross into political violence at a scale that required a fundamental reassessment of the domestic threat picture. The DHS assessment said that assumption was not supported by the current threat indicators. The administration maintained the assumption anyway. And today, in a shopping center in Garland, Texas, 14 people are dead. The assumption met the threat indicator. The threat indicator was right. Receipt number 1. The FBI terrorism designation and what it legally and investigatively means. Documented. According to a statement confirmed by the FBI's Dallas field office and the Department of Justice's National Security Division, the Garland shooting has been formally designated a domestic terrorism investigation under 18 U.S.C. Section 2331, the federal statute that defines domestic terrorism as violent acts dangerous to human life that appear intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. The influence the policy of a government language is critical. It is the legal standard that distinguishes this investigation from a mass shooting investigation. It means the FBI is not just investigating who pulled the trigger and why. It is investigating whether the act was intended to influence a specific policy. And the manifesto, according to federal charging documents filed this afternoon, explicitly names the Iran operation and the congressional war powers debate as the context for the violence. Now stop right there. That is not an allegation. That is a federal charging document. Filed. Public. Naming the Iran policy debate as context for an act of domestic terrorism on American soil. That document exists. It is in the federal record. And every member of Congress who has spoken or voted or issued a statement about the Iran operation is now, in some sense, proximate to a federal terrorism investigation that cites the policy debate they participated in as the motivating context. That is not an accusation of wrongdoing. It is a description of the legal landscape that has just materialized around one of the most contested policy debates in the current Congress. Receipt number 2. The 11-word tweet, the 5 Republican senators, and the Gold Star mother. Here is the part that should make your blood boil. The president's first public statement after the FBI terrorism designation read, in its entirety, "A total disgrace. Radical left violence. We will find these people." 11 words. No names of the dead. No condolences to the families. No acknowledgement that the FBI had just designated it domestic terrorism, a designation that applies equally to violence from any political motivation, including the pro-conflict grievance vector that DHS flagged alongside the anti-war one. Within 43 minutes, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska issued a statement. Senator Susan Collins of Maine issued a statement. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana issued a statement. Senator Mitt Romney, retired, but whose statement was amplified by every national outlet within minutes, issued a statement. Senator Todd Young of Indiana issued a statement. All 5 statements used the word condolences. All 5 statements named the victims. All 5 statements called for a unified national response. None of them described the shooting as radical left violence before the FBI had completed its political motivation assessment. And then, 47 minutes after the president's tweet, the Gold Star mother from San Antonio, whose son, Staff Sergeant Daniel Reyes, was killed in an Al-Anbar rocket attack 6 weeks ago, appeared on camera. She had been scheduled to speak at a veterans event. Instead, she said this, and these are her exact words from the press pool video. "My son died for this country. Those people in Garland died in this country. I cannot tell the difference anymore between who Washington is protecting and who Washington is forgetting." 8 words became the sentence. The families deserved the sentence. They got 11 words and a political framing that 5 members of the president's own party immediately declined to adopt. If this is putting together the full picture, the DHS threat assessment that predicted this, the FBI designation that defines it, the political response that compounded it, in a way that makes the sequence clear and the accountability visible, you are ahead of most people trying to process what today actually means. There is still more: the congressional response, the security implications for the members who have been most publicly vocal on the Iran debate, and the specific ways today changes the political calculus for the 2026 midterm map we documented in the last video. Hit subscribe right now. This channel assembles the architecture of what is happening in real time, and today is a day where the architecture matters more than the individual pieces. Now compare the president's 11-word tweet to what the 5 Republican senators said within 43 minutes, and to what the White House said when asked to explain the gap. At a briefing, the White House press secretary was shown the president's tweet and the 5 senators' statements side by side and asked directly why the president's statement did not include condolences to the families of the 14 dead. And this is a direct quote from the official press briefing transcript. The president's statement was an immediate and forceful response to an act of political violence. He was focused on accountability, not on optics. He was asked why a condolence was not in the statement. The answer was that condolences are optics. A spokesperson for one of the 5 Republican senators was then asked whether their principal agreed with the characterization of condolences as optics. The response was a 2-second pause followed by, "Senator Collins' statement speaks for itself." These are not serious people managing a national tragedy with the institutional gravity it demands. These are communicators defending a statement that 5 members of their own party declined to mirror, whose absence of the most basic human acknowledgement of the dead was noticed by the families before any political analyst had written a single word about it. Here is the part that should keep every American who believes in the safety of public spaces awake tonight. Receipt number 3. The security implications that are already in motion and that nobody is discussing clearly enough. The FBI's domestic terrorism designation triggers a mandatory notification to every member of Congress whose name appears in the manifesto. According to 2 sources on the Senate Intelligence Committee who spoke to reporters after the designation, the manifesto contains references to specific congressional votes, including the War Powers Resolution vote, and to specific members who cast those votes. This is not general anti-government rhetoric. According to investigators, it is specific, named, with the votes cited by date and roll call number. The FBI's Counterterrorism Division is now conducting threat assessments for those members. Their security details are being reviewed. Their district office protocols are being updated. This is happening right now, today, while the families in Garland are still in hospital corridors. The political debate about the Iran operation, the war powers votes, the classified briefings, the 5 shifting objectives, the Republican defections. That debate is no longer only a constitutional debate or a strategic debate or an electoral debate. As of 11:47 this morning, it is also a domestic security matter. And the members who have been most publicly vocal on both sides of the Iran debate are the ones whose names investigators are cross-referencing against a terrorism manifesto this afternoon. Now let us look at what the contrast between the presidential response and the senatorial one reveals. One side said, disgrace. 5 others said, condolences. One side named a political motivation before the FBI completed its assessment. 5 others waited for the investigation. One side produced 11 words. 5 others produced paragraphs. One side called it optics. The families called it the difference between being seen and being forgotten. One side governs by the tweet. The other side governs by the room. There is one image from today that will define how this moment is remembered. A press briefing room. A spokesperson defending the absence of condolences by calling condolences optics. And outside that briefing room, 43 minutes before the defense of the optics, a Gold Star mother standing in a parking lot in San Antonio, saying 8 words that no spokesperson's briefing answer can reach. One image is the podium with the briefing room seal. The other image is a grieving mother in a parking lot. One side is the institutional response. The other side is the human cost of the institutional response not being enough. Both images exist. Both are on the record. Only one of them will be in the memory of the families of the 14 dead in Garland, Texas. So what does this mean for you? Not for political analysts. For the person watching this, if you live in Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro, in the communities surrounding Garland, in any Texas community where a shopping center is a place your family goes on a Tuesday afternoon, here is what the FBI terrorism designation means for your immediate security environment. A domestic terrorism designation triggers a joint terrorism task force response that coordinates FBI, DHS, local law enforcement, and intelligence resources in the affected region. That coordination includes a threat assessment for potential follow-on attacks, a review of surveillance coverage gaps in commercial public spaces, and an evaluation of whether the lone actor profile of this event is consistent with a network-connected threat requiring broader investigation. The JTTF response does not mean another attack is imminent. It means the FBI has determined that the threat environment that produced this attack has not been fully characterized and may not be fully resolved. Your safety in public spaces is not reduced by the investigation. But the investigation's scope, which is now explicitly connected to the political debate surrounding the Iran operation, means the threat environment is not isolated to a single actor. It is connected to something larger. And that something larger is what the FBI is now working to understand. If you have children or grandchildren who are in or approaching military service age, here is the specific and documented mechanism by which today connects to the broader security picture. The DHS threat assessment that preceded this event described anti-war radicalization as one of 3 threat vectors in the current environment. It described that vector as most active among young adults aged 18 to 29 who have personal connections to military families affected by the Iran operation. The shooting in Garland was carried out by a 23-year-old. His manifesto cites the death of a family member in Al-Anbar in its opening pages. The DHS assessment described this exact profile, not this specific person, this profile, as an elevated risk 7 weeks ago. The question that investigators are now asking is whether the conditions that produce this profile are isolated or systemic. If the answer is systemic, if the combination of an open-ended military engagement, a fractured political consensus, $5 gas, and an undefined conflict with no visible endpoint is producing radicalization pathways at the scale the DHS assessment warned about, then the security response cannot be limited to prosecuting an individual. It has to address the conditions. And addressing the conditions requires the kind of honest policy accounting that the 11-word tweet did not begin. If you run a business or manage any public-facing commercial space, here is the liability implication that your legal counsel is already reviewing. The DHS threat assessment published 7 weeks ago established the current threat level as elevated. That document is now an exhibit in what will be the largest domestic terrorism civil litigation in Texas in a decade. The legal standard for reasonable security measures in commercial spaces is reassessed following every federal terrorism designation. Your exposure to that reassessment begins today. If you care about the constitutional and democratic health of the country, about whether the institutions of government function with the gravity their responsibilities require in moments of national crisis, here is the most important implication of today, and the one that is hardest to quantify. The presidency derives a significant portion of its functional authority from its symbolic role, its capacity to speak for the nation, to name what is happening, to provide the moral frame that allows communities in shock to feel that they are held by something larger than their grief. That capacity is not a policy. It is not a statute. It is not an executive order. It is accumulated credibility, deposited slowly through moments handled with gravity, and withdrawn quickly through moments handled otherwise. The 11-word tweet withdrew something. The 5 Republican senators' statements within 43 minutes registered the withdrawal publicly and from within the president's own party. The Gold Star mother's 8 words named what was withdrawn. Credibility of that kind does not return through a subsequent statement. It returns, slowly, through subsequent behavior. The country will be watching the subsequent behavior, and the families in Garland will be watching it from a proximity no one else in the country shares. The administration is on television now describing the investigation as proceeding and the security response as robust. The 5 Republican senators' statements are in the public record. The Gold Star mother's 8 words are on video. The DHS elevated threat assessment is on the DHS website. The FBI charging documents naming the Iran policy debate as motivating context are in federal court. The 14 names of the dead have not yet been read publicly by the president. All of those things are simultaneously true. Here is the hard truth. A domestic terrorism event that the threat assessment predicted, in a political environment the threat assessment described, carried out by an actor whose profile the threat assessment flagged, at a moment when the policy debate the manifesto cites is the most contested in the current Congress. That is not a random tragedy. It is a predictable consequence of specific conditions that were documented in advance and not sufficiently acted upon. The president did not create those conditions alone. The political polarization that the DHS assessment cited is decades in the making. The radicalization pathways that produced this actor are not the product of any single policy or any single administration. But the response to the event, when it arrives, belongs entirely to the people in office at the moment it happens. The 11 words belong to this president. The 5 senators' responses belong to the senators. The Gold Star mother's 8 words belong to the country. And the 14 dead in Garland belong to all of us. The moral verdict is this: a presidency that cannot find condolences in its first response to 14 dead Americans, whatever the political framing, whatever the medium, whatever the speed of the news cycle, has told you something about what it believes the job requires. The families heard it. The 5 senators heard it. The Gold Star mother heard it. And the country right now is deciding what to do with what it heard. Where does this go from here? I see 3 paths. The first is the accountability and healing arc. The investigation proceeds with full resources. The congressional notifications about the manifesto's specific references produce a bipartisan security briefing that temporarily elevates the institutional response above the partisan one. The president issues a fuller statement, with names, with condolences, with the acknowledgement that the DHS threat assessment's warning about an elevated domestic threat environment deserved a response it did not fully receive. The 5 Republican senators who moved first are given credit, publicly, for moving right. The Gold Star mother is received at the White House. The community in Garland begins the long process that communities that have absorbed mass violence always begin, slowly, painfully, and with more dignity than the political system that surrounds them typically manages. But even in this best case, the 11-word tweet is in the record. The absence of condolences in the first response to 14 dead Americans is documented, time-stamped, and will be cited in every future assessment of this presidency's response to national tragedy. That does not reverse. What it means is determined by what comes after it. The second path is the politicization spiral. The investigation's connection to the Iran policy debate, explicit in the manifesto, now public in the charging documents, becomes the organizing frame for partisan conflict rather than national accountability. Each side uses the event to confirm what it already believed about the other. The DHS threat assessment's warning about elevated risk from both anti-war and pro-conflict radicalization gets selectively cited. One side emphasizes the anti-war vector, the other emphasizes the pro-conflict vector, and the comprehensive picture the assessment actually painted gets lost in the contest. The families in Garland become props in arguments they did not choose to enter. The 14 dead become data points. The Gold Star mother's 8 words get clipped and recontextualized until they mean something different than what she said in a parking lot in San Antonio. The investigation continues. The spiral accelerates. And the security conditions that produce the event, the elevated threat environment, the radicalization pathways, the policy debate now connected to a terrorism manifesto, do not get addressed, because addressing them requires the kind of bipartisan institutional seriousness that the spiral has made impossible. The third path is the escalation that changes everything. This is the one nobody wants to say out loud. The FBI's investigation into the manifesto's specific references to congressional votes reveals a network rather than a lone actor. A coordinated threat, not yet acted upon, but planned, organized, and directed at political targets connected to the Iran debate. The domestic terrorism designation expands. The congressional security protocols move from review to active protection. The Capitol Police request and receive emergency supplemental resources. The members of Congress who have been most publicly vocal on the Iran debate from both parties alter their public schedules. And the political debate that has been conducted with the urgency of an electoral contest, war powers votes, classified briefings, shifting objectives, approval polling, is suddenly conducted in the shadow of a security environment that treats participation in that debate as a threat vector. You would normally say that the American political system, the rallies, the town halls, the public statements, the open Senate floor debates, would not fundamentally alter its character in response to a domestic terrorism event, however severe. But normal left the building a long time ago. And there are no more guardrails. None. What remains is the FBI investigation, the manifesto and the charging documents, the names in the manifesto that have not yet been made public, and the security assessment of what those names mean for the people who carry them. That assessment is being conducted right now, tonight. While the families in Garland are still waiting in the corridors, here is what I know for certain, regardless of which path this takes. The DHS threat assessment was right. The elevated domestic threat environment it described was not hypothetical. It was predictive. 7 weeks separated the prediction from the event. 7 weeks in which the security response to the assessment's warning was not sufficient to prevent what the assessment warned about. That is a factual statement about a documented timeline. The investigation will determine what more could have been done. That will take months. The 14 families in Garland do not have months. They have tonight. And tonight, they have 11 words, and a Gold Star mother's 8. The gap between those two sentences is the distance between the country we have and the country the 14 dead deserve to live in.